of support services into a whole lot of different organisations. So this was, using some of that kind of model and insight. How are your minds feeling? Honestly, try and play with that one, and I think you'll find something useful. Let me boil that down into something a lot simpler now. So we're still talking about complexity, and we're still thinking about that shift in leadership worlds from just trying to manage things technically to buy the service to meet the needs, to thinking about outcomes. So this is Richard Selwyn's model. Richard Selwyn's book, Outcomes and Efficiencies, and his recent work in children's services is well worth reading, and he often speaks at the Commissioning Academy. So there are a set of things you can do if you're a commissioner to think about inputs and outputs across the system. Yep. You can think about optimizing your resources, and this leads us to think much more widely about resources. So instead of just our budget being paid out to procure services, we're now thinking about voluntarism. We're thinking about what innovation can offer, what the market can offer, and what the community can do for themselves, and we're thinking about the assets of the individuals. We're thinking about the physical and the economic landscape that we're in, and we're treating all of those as possible assets. So not just our budget, but how can we marshal all of these resources into place? Yep. So his example is, how can we think about the buildings we've got, and how we use all the buildings we've got to better improve citizen outcomes. But thinking about libraries as a potential location for day services is a great example of that kind of thinking. Then you can think about better targeting of your inputs, okay? And Richard's example is when he was a Children's Services Commissioner in Harrow, he was spending 90% of his direct budget on council provision of settings, places for kids, right? And he was spending 6% of his budget on inspecting and making sure that the private provision of settings for kids was up to standard, and 4% of his budget on in-home support. But if you look at what all the evidence, this is one area where I think we've got really good evidence of what makes a difference to kids' life chances, it's 95% what happens in the home, between the ages of 2 and 5 particularly, and it's only 5% what happens in the settings, in the play centres and all the rest, right? So he asked himself that question: is spending 90% of our money on only a part of the provision in the borough, just making sure that we're running something, a good way of allocating our resources? Could we target it better to actually influence positively what happens in the home? You get the idea. Using the right mechanisms to deliver change gets you part of the way there as well. For example, we're only controlling 10% of the money and of the things that influence people's lives as a local authority. How can we influence the other 90%? What mechanisms can we use to marshal a broader set of resources? And can we look at our system as a whole system in which we, in his case the council, only play a small role to think about how we can have influence and help to redesign and reshape the whole system? So Richard's quote is, commissioning is deciding how to use the total resource available in order to improve citizen outcomes in the most efficient, effective and sustainable way. And to really give you an example of that, Carolyn Wilkins from Oldham talks about the difference between procuring a street cleansing service, where you've got to really know what you want, and you've got to have a really good ICT, good procurement, good market engagement, and you've definitely got to have good performance management. And I've seen councils take photos of 9x9 metre grids and identify how many bits of rubbish are in each square of the grid, and then fine the provider appropriately and all kinds of things like that. And then you've got to have a good review and a good process for doing the next one, right? But how different is that from commissioning for clean streets? If you're commissioning for clean streets, you've probably still got to procure a street cleansing service as part of that, but you've also got to think about urban design, how many litter bins you've got, where they're placed, have you got wind tunnels, what are the nudges that make people drop litter or stop them from dropping litter, does enforcement actually work or not? Nobody seems to know. Can people pick up their own litter? What does clean really mean? When is clean important? Why is clean important? How is clean important? And is it just the duster going around on Wednesday and ripping all the bags and spreading things over the streets, and we're paying somebody to go around on Thursday and brush it all up, right? So you see the difference between that narrow focus on procurement using the money we've got to get the service, and commissioning, which is playing on a bigger stage. A bigger picture of resources, not just what we have in our kitty, but what we can influence in all kinds of ways, maybe even by stepping back and just letting the community get on with it, and a much more targeted picture about understanding outcomes. So actually, I think Richard's diagram is the wrong way around. You should be thinking, what outcomes are we trying to achieve? And we'll talk about those later today, but outcomes will be different for the individual and the family and the cohort and the community, so you have to be aware of that. What are the resources that we have available, and what methods can we use to marshal those and influence them? So most commissioners are put in a world where they're made to think about their budget and their needs and their services. How can you step up that level to think about all the resources you can influence and all of the outcomes that you can help to achieve by influencing all, that whole world around you? And are we actually measuring and working to what matters in the first place? Most of the things that we measure in our organisations are functional measures. They're the easy things for us to measure, and they're not actually what matters to the citizen in terms of their outcomes. If we actually measure the end-to-end process and actually measure the thing that matters to the citizen, we will manage and organise our services. Our System 3-star will be completely different. We will manage and organise our services in different ways. So a trivial example is the one that's given here. For most call centres, what matters to the citizen is getting their issue fairly resolved. And what we measure, we almost never measure that. What we measure is time to answer, how many missed calls we've got, whether people said we were nice on the phone or not, and all those things that are kind of really easy to measure. Yeah? So there's all these famous examples of housing repairs where we've met our targets at every step of the way. We picked up the phone quickly enough, we set up an appointment quickly enough, we inspected quickly enough, and then we decided it was the wrong type of repair, so then we started the clock again, and then we did a different type of repair, and then we did it wrong, so we started the clock again, and we sent somebody else, and it's been 316 days, and the person's window still hasn't been repaired, but we've given ourselves 17 ticks in the box for doing every step of the journey right. You get the idea, yeah? And if you'd measured the 316 days and the satisfaction of the person it's been repaired, you would scrap that whole system and start again and build something different.
Can I go back to a previous model about child provisioning?
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
So I think part of the problem in terms of delivering that in a real world context is possibly we're going from high profile, tangible, visible service delivery to low profile, intangible,
Yes.
In a period of austerity, it looks from a crude outside perspective, like you're not improving the service you're providing.
Yep.
How does that then impact?
Oh yeah.
Your ability to deliver in an environment where you're in a public service and accountable.
It's not an easy question. I mean, look, we did a lot of the research and analysis and some of the design work on the Brent library strategy. Was somebody here from Brent? People here from West London anyway, which led to the complete decapitation of the entire leading Labour group and sit-ins in libraries and all the rest. And it was reviewed 9 times. It went to the Supreme Court and they said, yes, this is a good analysis of the needs of the area and a good plan for provision of library services. And when it was put through, before everybody then got sacked because it was so unpopular, it increased library use, it increased library outcomes and all the rest. But it meant closing some libraries. So it looked terrible and it was really, really deeply unpopular to that extent of threatening the politicians, which is, of course, the worst thing you can do in government. We run on 2 currencies, don't we? Money and votes. So it's really important to be aware of that. So it's bloody difficult is part of the answer. Has anybody got tips on that? You know, how can you do the right thing when it's really easy for politicians and press and public to cry foul and say, no, that's complete bullshit, you're actually cutting services, you're making things worse. If Richard had closed all the Harrow provision and really done stuff that improved outcomes in the home, how could you justify that?
So I guess co-production, if the people who receiving the service will have the outcomes,
yep,
they're going to be the best evangelists about it actually meeting their needs or their outcomes better.
Yeah, yes. That's part of it. So you get people on side from the start. In fact, you get them to design, see for themselves. But now that's expensive and time consuming and hard in a time of austerity, but I'm absolutely with you on that. Any other strategies?
There's something about transparency, isn't it, in terms of where you're starting from and where you intend to get to.
Yes.
It's interesting when you look at lots of kind of local government, savings plans, actually, they're not called savings plans, are they? They're called something else.
Yeah.
Ultimately, within that it has to be a clear vision about...
You've got to deliver the savings, yeah.
Savings. So there's something about how you manage messages and communication.
Yeah, so even if you're not able to do the co-design, if you're doing the design in a communicative and transparent way, you've got a chance of taking people on the journey, or at least pointing to the audit trail. Yeah, well, ideally, but yeah.
It reminds me of this is an nice question, but it's about conversation and having a mature conversation with the community. Years ago, I remember a presentation by the stroke czar, Anthony Rudd, who was a surgeon, a brain surgeon, and he had developed a leading edge facility at Guy's and Thomas's for treating strokes, and then we appointed the stroke czar to analyse how they could do systems reconfiguration across the area, such as people having strokes. And he looked at the demographics of London and realised that in fact his world-class facility was located in the wrong place, insofar as people who have strokes typically live on the edge of London in the green leafy areas. And so he had to say, well, we've got to dissemble this and we've got to reinvest the money elsewhere. And he said the problem was, and he was a surgeon, is that if you say that you're closing things in order to reinvest the money, you will end up with people outside the hospital with the placards, in his words, saying, save our crap hospital. But if you encounter the same person in the back of an ambulance who's having a stroke, and you say, we can go to a local hospital, it's 10 minutes away, or we can go 10 minutes further, where we have a state-of-the-art bit of equipment, and it's staffed, most critically, with the radiographer, so you will be seen immediately and will be able to diagnose what's happening, see inside your brain and do something about it. No argument whatsoever. But it's two different types of conversations. So, but I think what we were saying about transparency and accountability and actually being able to demonstrate the rationale for the change that you're making is part of the solution to that.
And also, there's a very genuine, justifiable scepticism that when you've closed the crap hospital, you actually will invest the money in the good hospital, and it won't be clawed back by somebody else for something else, and the world might change in that negative way. I think that's something really powerful to work on over the next, particularly if you've got examples of where you're doing things that are for the best, but are very likely to be misinterpreted as malicious or ill-intentioned in other ways. That we could actually actively work on that. Good stakeholder management, good communications, is all part of it. But I think the co-design and the openness are the fundamental kind of tricks if you can pull them off. We've just launched, in conjunction with partners, the Australasian Transformation Academy, which is very exciting. Hence my kangaroo look. We're hoping to work with the New South Wales Youth Justice System, where they absolutely believe in a trauma-informed model of rehabilitation, and they can't say that in public because they've got a government which is about punishment and all the rest, and they don't even have control of the clinical psychologists who work 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, and that's not when the kids in the justice system need the care. You see what I mean? So that's a big example of this challenge. How can they secretly move to a trauma-informed model of rehabilitation that actually might do some good in the world instead of just punishing people who've already been punished, without without letting anybody know, but managing to sort of influence all of these other kind of resources around them. So this is a problem that occurs all over the place, and that's a challenge with democracy, isn't it? You certainly got to bring the politicians along with you, but so many times when the politicians are being brave and people are kind of sticking their neck out for a radical model, actually you've got to, I suppose the point is you've really got to believe that the outcome is right. But in the case of Brent, the fact that there were more library loans and better library outcomes and more library use and more library members didn't save the leader of the council, because he closed libraries. So that's about, I won't leave you on that note. As I said, we're a few minutes late for lunch, but I'll just finish a little point and leave us on an up note, hopefully, and then we'll reconvene this afternoon. So thanks for that challenge. So in Citizen World, we have a definition which is a service co-creates value with and for the customer. So actually, I would claim that at a very fundamental level, every public service has to be co-created. Right? Even the police can't do much without the scrote in question being in custody, right? But most of what we do can't actually happen without the active engagement of the citizen. Does that make sense? And our job is really to reduce all of the stuff from the customer need to the positive outcome. So when somebody comes to us with a need, we want to have as few steps, as little time, as little effort, as little cost to get them the positive outcome. What would be a way of even going further and cheating that system? They don't even need to come to us, because they can achieve the positive outcome themselves in their community or through their own resourcefulness. So that leads on to the model that most of our time we're dealing with demand, and dealing with demand is quite demoralising. That's what I used to do at Shepherd's Bush Advice Centre. It was pretty horrible. But in times of austerity, our instinct is to control the flow of that demand, dam the river. Yeah? But we know that usually makes things worse, because the needs get higher and more complex. They come around the sides. I knew a strategic director of finance and transformation in a big city council who was spending a day and a half a week on FOI and member and MP inquiries because of all the things that were coming around the sides of the dam. Yeah? So it's actually more empowering if we can look behind the demands to the actual needs that people have that trigger them to come and present at public services. What's the risk, though, with being really good at helping people with their needs?
Creates more demand.
Creates more demand, partly. What was the other one? Did somebody else say anything else? Huh? It changes, the needs change, absolutely. So there are various risks. One that I would like to draw attention to is the shadow side of the caring industry. We become very attached to helping people with their needs, and this is not an asset-based model. This is about codependency and wanting people to have needs so that we can be the hero and we can save them. Yeah? It's much more effective if we can possibly look behind the needs at the purpose that they are trying to achieve in their life. And this is what good, progressive, person-centred social care actually does, and say, how can we enable this person, preferably under their own resources, or their family, or their community, or their mates, whatever it may, whatever it really is, to actually achieve their purposes in their lives without the needs arising that create the demands on public services. And the hypothesis is that if you find that work that helps people to achieve their purpose, that's the actual joy of public service. That's what we all signed up for, and that's what we can help to unlock as commissioners. I think that's